Welcome friends, welcome to Sunday morning and the Old Cookbook Show. And today we're going to do a recipe out of the Five Roses Cookbook. And this is called Five Roses Cookbook, Bread, Pastry, etc. And it's a little bit different than the other Five Roses cookbooks that we've used so far. This one is from 1915, so right at the beginning of World War I. And it is also very much a community cookbook. It says right here at the front, carefully chosen from the contributions of over 2,000 successful users of Five Roses flour throughout Canada. So these are recipes that have been submitted to the cookbook, and you really can tell that because the recipe we're going to do today, which is a parkin, there are 4 parkin recipes on this page. Each one a little bit different, each one that would reflect the differences in family. One of them is a Yorkshire parkin, another one is a Lancashire parkin. Those are different. And then there's 2 parkins that are without eggs, and those are different again. And some of those differences really come down to probably when these families immigrated to Canada and how many generations they'd gone through while they've been in Canada. Those changes are often about the differences in culture once they've integrated into Canadian culture, and also just ingredients. Ingredients would be different here than what they would have been used to at home, or what their grandparents would have been used to at home in Yorkshire. So first off, this is lard. This is pure pork lard. And I'm going to put this in here and just cream it up until it's light and fluffy. Now, the recipe gives absolutely no instructions at all. Mix and bake. Straightforward, mix and bake. So I'm going to use what I know about making cakes. So while that creams together, I'm going to deal with the dry ingredients. So I've got flour, and to that I'm going to add baking powder, ground dried ginger, and finally something that's called mixed spice. Now, in 2019, mixed spice isn't something that's prevalent in Canada. It's something that I really had to search for at the grocery store. And all of the recipes that I found for mixed spice, or that were called mixed spice, had different ingredients in them. There was sort of the same, but there were large variations in what people put in their mixed spice. So for a North American, think of this as akin to pumpkin pie spice. There's the main ingredients, but there are differences. And I will link to, or put in the description, how to make your own mixed spice. Now, mixed spice and allspice, completely different. Mixed spice is a mixture of spices, but allspice is only one thing and one thing only, and that is the allspice berry from a tree or a shrub that grows in the Caribbean. And I will again link below to our video on allspice. And that's something that really confuses people. A lot of people I've found think that allspice is a mixture. It's not. It's one thing. Okay, next in is some white sugar. And we're just going to cream this into the lard, again, until it's light and fluffy. Okay, so the next ingredient to go in is molasses. And this would be a concession to the place. In the UK, you would use treacle. Most of your recipes call for treacle, either black treacle or light treacle. This calls for molasses, and that's because molasses is more prevalent in Canada. I can still find treacle if I search through a bunch of different grocery stores, but I'm not going to come across it that often, and it's going to be way more expensive than molasses. And I suppose you could argue for days over molasses versus treacle. They both sort of come from the same place. They're both from the refining of sugarcane. Now, an interesting side note is a couple of the other recipes on this page call for syrup, which could be refiner's syrup, which is related to both molasses and treacle, or it could be corn syrup, which is not high fructose corn syrup. In 1915, it would have just been straight corn syrup. It wouldn't have been modified to make it high fructose. So that gets beat in, and I'm going to scrape down the sides because you should always scrape down the sides of your mixer. And the next thing to go in are eggs. There's 3 eggs, and you put them in one at a time. You put them in, make sure they're fully incorporated, and then put in the next one. Because the recipe doesn't give many instructions, I'm at a bit of a loss of when to put in the lemon juice. So I think I'm going to put it in next and see what happens. So it says the juice of 1 lemon, which isn't a lot of information. There's a lot of people out there that will want to know how many milliliters exactly. Let's see. I'll put that in the instructions. Next in are the oats. Now I'm using large flake oatmeal. I've seen recipes that use fine oatmeal. I've seen recipes that use steel cut oats. And the recipes with the steel cut oats, they need to be soaked overnight. So I think these large flake oats are a bit of a compromise on time because you don't have to soak them overnight in order to get them softened enough to cook. And they'll probably give a better texture than a really fine flake or quick cooking oatmeal. Now with the mixer on low, I'm just going to spoon in the flour and spice mixture. Now you don't want to overmix this, so as soon as the last spoonful is in and incorporated, turn off the mixer. Now the vagueness of this recipe, the last ingredient, it says milk to stiffen. And I'm looking at this cake batter and I'm thinking this is a pretty stiff cake batter already. It doesn't say how much milk to use. I don't know that this needs any milk. So I'm taking that last ingredient instruction to mean if it's too thick or it needs some milk, add some milk at your own discretion. I'm going to say I'm not adding any milk. Which brings us to the next problem with the recipe. Of course, it doesn't tell you what size tin to use. So I've got a 9x12 because that's an awful lot of batter. I've got a 9x12 and I've put a parchment paper sling in it. So let's get the batter into the pan. Now the baking instructions are bake in a slow oven. No time, no other information. So I'm going to do 325 and that's 325 degrees Fahrenheit. I know that drives our European viewers nuts that I flip back and forth between metric for weights and measurements and then Fahrenheit for the oven. And that's just the way Canada implemented the metric system. We always talk in Fahrenheit for oven temperatures. Don't know why, it's just the way it is. So I'm gonna put this in the oven probably an hour and then I'll start looking at it. I have my suspicions that it'll probably take about an hour and a half to cook. Then I'm gonna pull it out and I'm going to let it sit for a couple of days before we come back and do a tasting. It is finally time to try the Yorkshire Parkin. So it's been wrapped up for a couple of days, resting. Apparently the texture gets better with time. Now, I'm pretty sure I overbaked it.
I would, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I could confidently say you also agree with you. I concur.
There's no baking time given, so I looked around online to see, what other people baked it for, and I only baked it for about half that amount of time.
Which is always wise if you're not sure, right?
Yeah.
Small amounts and then
I
build it.
was surprised at half the amount of time that it was overbaked at that point.
Do you think their cake was a bigger cake or that they made it?
It was about the same. Oh, you know what? It's
It looks great.
Okay.
I mean, except for the edge, it looks great.
Okay, let's try this. So, I have to admit, this is not a cake that I've ever had growing up. Never even heard of it. As much as there's 4 recipes
In that particular?
in this particular book, it peters out very quickly. Next edition only has 1.
Well,
And then you get down to 1 in the 1950 version, and it's a cookie.
so I wonder what tradition, you know what I mean? Is it a tradition? Is it something like the eggless, milkless, butterless cake that, is very popular in war times, but not so popular outside of that?
Apparently you eat this on bonfire night.
Oh,
Guy Fawkes.
yeah, not really something we do here.
So for our American viewers, Guy Fawkes was a bit of a patsy. He got caught in the gunpowder plot to blow up the king in 1605. He was drawn and quartered.
Yeah, nice.
Not very. So, but
That
but
being said, there's an event in England, generally bonfire night. It's in November?
November 5th. So it's a big night, big bonfires. They burn him in effigy.
And firecrackers. Woo!
So it's not something. It's not a Canadian. In 2019, it's not a Canadian tradition, except
Oh, there's an except?
Newfoundland.
Oh.
Newfoundland still, in parts, celebrates because Newfoundland didn't become part of Canada until 1949.
I don't remember the exact
That's
date.
something I should know.
But you too can look that up, just like I can.
Post World War II, Newfoundland joined Canada. So I think that this sort of traces the trajectory of Canada's involvement with England.
Okay, but it's a nice cake. So the question is, why not keep it in the cookbook, I wonder?
I think the oatmeal makes it very heavy.
Yeah, but I kind of like that about it.
Yeah. I think this is a very interesting cake. I think if I baked it a little bit less, the recipe says to add milk if needed. And I didn't know what that meant. I think now, I would have added maybe between a quarter and a half a cup of milk. But never having made it before, never having any experience with it, I was sort of, flying blind. But if I made this again, yes, I'd add the milk. I'd bake it a little bit less. It would be ooey gooey and absolutely fantastic.
You could always add dates.
I think fruit would be amazing in this. Raisins or dates?
Everything else has dates. Why not? Or apricots, or whatever you want. My friend, it's your recipe.
So, November 5th, 2019, if you are in Portugal Cove, St. Philip's, Newfoundland, they're having a big bonfire. They're roasting marshmallows.
You know what to bring.
There'll be hot dogs for the kids. Bake up a Yorkshire parkin and bring it to the bonfire, because I didn't see anything about parkin in their list of events.
There you go.
So if you're in Newfoundland, if you're in St. John's, it's only like 20 minutes away.
Oh.
So bake up this cake, drive over to Portugal Cove, share it with your friends. Thanks for
Good
stopping
time.
by. See you again soon.
I ate mine really fast. I really like it. But then I'm a sucker for a spice cake.